Okay, I'm going to be speaking about 1 Corinthians chapter 6. In the previous few messages, I was in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, where Paul was talking about some of the problems related to the relationships that people were having with one another. You have the person who had his father's wife, and that was causing a disruption in the church such that it would make it difficult for people to have good relationships with one another in the church, and also it would be difficult to establish relationships with people in the community of Corinth so that they may be able to effectively reach those people with the gospel. There were some relational problems because of the sin that was present. Towards the end of chapter 5, Paul speaks about some of the other relational issues between people and when to decide if a person is going to have a continued relationship with another, or if they are going to put those relationships away. They're going to no longer have interactions with other people. In chapter 6, we have a situation that's a little bit more involved than just deciding to have someone in your life or not, trying to determine if you can participate in their life in a good way so that they can grow to know the Lord more, if you can contribute to their faith or not. Here in chapter 6, he talks about the situation when the people are violating one another in a way that there needs to be some kind of response, and that the people who are violating others need to change their behavior in some way, and that this behavior needs to be imposed on them. And so he speaks to the people about the issues related to bringing one another to some court of some kind in order to have them ordered to perform some kind of behavior in response to some kind of violation. And so this situation is just a little bit more involved. This is going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. I'm going to be between verses 1 and 8. But in this case, I think it's going to be a little bit easier for me to start in verse 8 and then work my way back up to verse 1. All right, so beginning in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 8, I'm going to start there where he says, "No, you yourselves do wrong and cheat, and you do these things to your brethren," right? Doing wrong and cheating to your brethren. That's what is going on. In the church, you have people in the church who are considered to be Christians who are doing wrong to each other, and they are cheating each other. This is what's taking place. All right? And this is reasonable to expect to see happen when you've got a bunch of new Christians who are trying to establish themselves as a church, and they're having relationships with one another. Then there could be some wrongdoing. There could be some cheating. It could be as direct as theft, whereas one person stole something from someone else. And so there needs to be some way for this to be resolved. It's significant enough that the person who stole something needs to return what they took, and that this may be it may be necessary to involve force in some way to ensure that there is a restoration of what was taken. That's a possibility. It could be as simple as you had two people make an agreement with one another, and one person failed to do their part of the agreement. It could be something like that. That's perfectly realistic. And so because of their failure to do their part in the agreement, the other person suffered some significant loss of some kind. And so by force, that's what the bringing someone to a court for, is to impose force. A person needs to be forced to compensate the other person who was violated because the person who did the violation did not fulfill their part of the agreement. These are some basic examples. But what we have here in verse 8 is the official verse that says that there definitely was some wrongdoing and some cheating taking place. Now, taking someone to a court in order to apply force on them to change their behavior so they may be able to compensate for the suffering that they caused is not always going to be a good solution. It might be reasonable for them to just simply not do anything. That could be a reasonable solution, and Paul introduces that in verse 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 7. Now, therefore, it is already an utter failure for you that you go to law against one another. Why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourselves be cheated? Okay, so what he says here is that there are circumstances when it's reasonable to do nothing. Okay, so you were cheated. So there was some wrongdoing that was done against you. Now, this is not to suggest that it's not significant, all right? But so this happened. Now, in response to this happening, is it really going to be a wise decision to bring someone to a court of some kind to force them to exercise some kind of behavior in response to what took place? There might be some situations when this simply is not the better option. He says, why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourselves be cheated? This is an option. The option of just doing nothing. Okay, so you were wronged. So you were cheated. And so, okay, there is the option of doing nothing about it. All right, just accept what has happened. Why would somebody do this? Why would you suppose that somebody would do nothing in response? Well, probably because it may not really make a difference in their lives. It may not make a difference. It may require more effort and more cost for, to try to get somebody to do something in response to their cheating and wrongdoing. It may just simply cost more effort than it's worth. And so these are decisions that need to be made, or that can be made, and Paul presents this. There is the option to just do nothing. Just allow yourself to be cheated. It might not be worth it to take somebody to court to require them to do something. What will be better for your life? What may be better for the relationships? Now, in general, when there is wrongdoing and cheating of this nature, that would be of such a profound nature as would require or could inspire someone to take someone else to a court to force behavior, at that point, you could suggest that the relationship is already ended. All right, that's usually the case. When there's a decision to bring one person to a court, then whatever relationship existed previously, that relationship comes to a complete end. Because at this point, one or both persons are going to decide that they do not want to have anything to do with the other person ever again. Which is reasonable. It's perfectly reasonable to make a decision like that they want to have no contact. If that's the kind of relationship that they have to impose force on somebody in order to compensate for wrongdoing or for loss, then the relationship is already really it is ended. If you want to end a relationship, then taking someone to a court for whatever reason is definitely a way to accomplish that. That will definitely happen because nobody wants to be forced into doing something, no matter what it is. They don't want to be forced to do that under the threat of severe punishment. Okay, now the relationship between a parent and a child requires that for a child to be properly trained and educated and prepared to be an adult. But between two adults now, this is not the way to have a healthy, constructive relationship. And so there is the option of just doing nothing and of accepting wrong. I personally have experienced this. I have had people in my life who wronged me greatly, who cheated me greatly, who stole from me. I've had people like that in my life, and I have found that there were plenty of situations where it just simply was not worth my time. It was not worth my effort to try and obtain compensation for what was lost. It just wasn't worth it. I could use my time in a better way just doing other things. Okay, that's a legitimate decision. I have made a decision on that basis many times to just simply accept the loss that I experienced because it just wasn't worth pursuing compensation for the loss. It just wasn't worth my time, worth my effort. And so all I was able to do was isolate myself completely from that individual, completely remove them from my life and no longer allow them to have access to me so that they wouldn't be able to wrong me or cheat me or steal from me in the ways that they did previously. And that was the solution, to completely exit the relationship. And from what I could tell, for the most part, they didn't care. They apparently did not care about that at all. They had no interest in continuing to have a relationship with me anyway. And so everybody was fine, and everybody kind of got on with their lives in certain ways. So that is something that I personally have experienced. There have been other times when the loss was quite significant. And for me to do something, perhaps with the effort and time that I would have put into it, maybe I would have recovered more in what I lost than what I would have been able to obtain if I did nothing. But those decisions to do nothing in those circumstances were made on the basis of what my goals were. What really were my goals? What were my objectives in my life? That were being affected by this. And what I discovered was that whether this wrongdoing or cheating took place or not, I was going to accomplish my goals. I was going to accomplish my objectives, and this was not going to keep me from accomplishing my objectives. And so it just wasn't worth the effort and the time to try and force someone to exercise certain behavior that would resolve the matter of me being wronged or cheated. Been lots of situations and circumstances like that I personally have encountered. I can recall that Jesus experienced something similar to this with Judas. It is recorded in the scriptures that Judas was stealing money from the group. All right, that he was keeping the box that was containing the donations that was given to the group for Jesus to conduct his ministry, and apparently he was stealing from the box, from the container that the money was kept in. Now, I personally have a suspicion that maybe this was not happening, but I will acknowledge that this is what it says in the scriptures, and on that basis, I will not say that that is wrong or that that is an error. I just have a personal suspicion, wondering, is this really what Judas was doing? I mean, really? Or is this just something that somebody said because they didn't like Judas and they just had something additional they could come up with to say against him? I'm not so sure, and I'm waiting on some more information concerning that. But if I was pressed on the issue, I would say, well, we're going to believe what it says there in the scriptures until I can find otherwise, but I'm going to ask about it later. But with Jesus, did Judas stop him from accomplishing his goals? From accomplishing his objectives? Of course not. Okay, so he stole from Jesus in a sense. So he cheated. So, he was exercising wrongdoing. But it did not stop Jesus, and it didn't inhibit the disciples from any of their objectives or any of their goals. Now, I'm not saying this to say that it is okay to steal, because it is not. It obviously is not. But when making the decision of are we going to do something about it, right? If you have been violated, if it's not really interfering with your goals and objectives in your life, then it might not be worth pursuing, okay? Just simply establish your protection from any further violations and get on with your life. I believe that that's a way of understanding verse 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 7. Again, where he says, "Now therefore it is already an utter failure for you that you go to law against one another. Why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourselves be cheated?" Okay, now in verse 5, I'm going to go up to verse 5. He says, "I say this to your shame. Is it so that there is not a wise man among you, not even one, who will be able to judge between his brethren? But brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers." Okay, so this is an alternative to doing nothing, an alternative to accepting the wrong and just simply getting on with your life. All right, well, if there needs to be something done about this, then why don't you handle this within the church? Why go outside the church to the unbelievers, those who don't even acknowledge the living God, those who don't have the same morality that was defined by God through the Mosaic Law? If you really have to have some kind of a judgment and some kind of change in behavior in order to resolve this matter, then maybe you can find somebody within the church, somebody who is wise. And, it could be that maybe there isn't someone. That could very well be a possibility, especially here in the church in Corinth, where you've got a lot of relatively new believers, and they may not be any different than those judges who are in the world just because they're new believers. They may not have the maturity to have worked through the milk of the scriptures. As he mentioned in previous chapters, he mentioned that they had not matured in the faith. They were still struggling with the milk of the scriptures, which has to do with the issues related to right and wrong and what is good and evil. Just those fundamental issues, the issues related to the law. And so maybe there wasn't somebody that was capable of resolving that matter. But even if there was, it doesn't mean automatically that both parties in this conflict are going to comply with the decision of the wise guy. It doesn't mean that both of them are going to be willing to comply with the decision that is made. And so there would need to be some understanding beforehand that both of them are going to comply with whatever the decision is that is made. Otherwise, there's no point in having a decision made. What's the point? Just take them to a court where they have officers who have swords who can force behavior, and that's that's what Paul is addressing. So again, to verse 5, "I say this to your shame." Okay, now there's some issues as to whether or not he should be using the technique of shame in order to address this issue, but I don't think that he's using this in order to manipulate them or to expect them to do something, otherwise they're going to be suffering some consequences, but to instead just simply recognize that you ought to be kind of ashamed of yourself, that you're not handling this as well as it could be handled. Is it so that there is not a wise man among you, not even one, who will be able to judge between his brethren? But brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers. Now therefore it is already an utter failure for you that you go to law against one another. Verse 7. he says it would be better, in effect, that you accept the wrong than to handle it in this manner. And I will say that it just is an alternative and something that a person should consider first before considering these other kinds of aggressive options. And that, yes, there could likely be many situations where it just simply would not be worth it to bring the brother to the unbelievers. This can cause a disruption and cause the church to be much less effective in reaching others with the gospel, as was conveyed in chapter 5. That if they, you have two Christian brothers who go to a court, then word could get out to say, oh, so this is how you guys relate to each other. This is how you resolve conflicts with one another. All right, this is how you handle these kinds of situations. First of all, these situations are even happening at all. And then this is how you work through them. This is how you resolve them. The people outside of the church will see those inside the church as not really being any different from those outside the church. And so what's the point of becoming a Christian or becoming a member of the church? First you would become a Christian, then become a member of the church. But obviously there's not much of a change happening within the people who are Christians. There does not appear to be too much of a change happening. They cheat and wrongdo each other just as people who are not Christians do with one another. So if there's not so much of a significant change and transformation within the people who are of the assembly of the church, then why would somebody be inspired to be saved themselves if there is evidence to show that maybe this isn't real? Maybe there is no God. Maybe there really is no gospel, no Jesus. Maybe these things are just things that those people imagined, that it's all fiction, because we don't see the effect happening on their lives as we would necessarily expect. All right, these are legitimate considerations for people to have with regards to how they're going to work through the conflicts that are taking place there in the church. Okay, so from here I'm going to go back up into verse 1 and work my way down from verse 1, chapter 6, verse 1. Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? All right, so he says, in effect, at the beginning, he starts out with, if you're going to go to court or if you're going to have some kind of a judgment made, then handle it among yourselves. It's in verse 7 and 8 where he says, but it would be, why don't you just accept wrong? I mean, why don't you just solve it this way? I wanted to start there in order to say that could be a better solution. If that's not an acceptable solution, and to rearrange relationships as a result of that, then why not resolve these matters internally within the church instead of trying to bring it to the unbelievers and their courts? All right, so that's verse 1, and he says, don't you know, in verse 2, that the saints will judge the world? Well, they may not know. They may not know. That's a subject that could be quite advanced beyond where they are in the faith at this time. And if they were to judge the world, if we are going to be called upon to judge the world, what would that really look like? I mean, when is that going to happen, and how is that going to be coordinated? I'm not so sure what that will really involve, what that will entail. I have an opinion that it could perhaps be that on the last day, when the Lord decides that he's done with this project that he is conducting here on earth, that there might be a lot of people who are going to need to be judged within a reasonable period of time. And there's going to be a lot of people to work through because there's going to be so many at the end of the age of this earth that perhaps God will delegate judgment to some of his mature believers in order to assist him in working through all these people in a timely manner. That's a possibility, something that comes to mind. And if I was asked to do that, I could see that happening easily, because he would just simply give me the instructions that I would expect that he would be using to judge others, which is simply, are you spiritually alive or are you spiritually dead? If you are spiritually alive, then you have a place in the kingdom of heaven. There's your judgment. That's it. If you're saved, then you have a place. There's nothing further to judge, right? If you are unsaved, well, then the decision is to just simply send you to hell. And if anybody would like to protest, what is that protest going to look like? It's going to be, judge me according to my works. That's all they've got. If you're not going to accept the gospel, then all you've got left is to be judged according to your works. So, okay, I'll judge people according to their works. That's pretty easy to do. They will not have enough works in order to suggest that they have earned their place in the kingdom of heaven, or that God owes them a place in the kingdom of heaven. And there will be some works that they failed to do. All right, there's going to be something that they failed such that they are not perfect as God. And so as soon as that is identified, then we can send them to hell. All right, so the judgment of the world doesn't seem to be that complicated to me. But he goes on and he speaks about another judgment, and that is the judgment of the angels. That's verse 3. Do you not know that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If then you have judgments concerning things pertaining to this life, do you appoint those who are least esteemed by the church to judge? I say this to your shame. Okay, blending in with the following verses. But going back up into verse 3, do you not know that we shall judge angels? Well, I really don't know much of anything about that at all. I can't point to anything in the scriptures that will give me some information that will help me to understand what it will mean for me to judge angels. So, no, I don't know a lot about that. It's easy for me to say that I don't know anything about judging angels. If he wants me to judge angels, he's going to have to provide me with the standard or the law that I need to use in order to judge the angels. In what way did they fall short, or in what way did they not fall short? That has to be defined according to some type of law. And it's not going to be the law of Moses, because angels are different from us. There certainly will not be a judgment of the angels using our law. I don't see that being done. Maybe the Lord will show me how that can be done, but I would expect that the Lord will would provide me with some instruction, some guidance and some training on how I should accomplish this. And so if I am going to be judging angels, I will do so if the Lord asks me to do so. But I will also be expecting him to give me proper guidance on how I would accomplish that in his interest and in his way. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and start from verse 1 and work our way down to verse 8. Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Do you not know that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If then you have judgments concerning things pertaining to this life, do you appoint those who are least esteemed by the church to judge? Least esteemed, that would be those who are the judges who are using a law other than the law of God. I say this to your shame. Is it so that there is not a wise man among you, not even one who will be able to judge between his brethren? But brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers. Now, therefore, it is already an utter failure for you that you go to law against one another. Why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourselves be cheated? No, you yourselves do wrong and cheat, and you do these things to your brethren. A way of saying, look, you are the ones who are violating one another, or even if you have been violated, chances are you have violated somebody else in another way yourself. Okay, I'm going to pause here because there's the introduction of a new topic from here. And I got a question for those of you who are using this for your small groups in order to facilitate some conversation. When were you stopped or delayed from your goals because of someone doing wrong or cheating you? Okay, I'll read this again. When were you stopped or delayed from your goals because of someone doing wrong or cheating you? And this can facilitate some conversation. All right, so this one's a little short. Sorry about that, but it's just because that's just the topic. And for me to get into the next one is just going to make this way too long. And so I'll continue in the next message. Thanks.